right, thank you. My name is Dave Brock. I am the chair of the Cuyahoga County Democratic Party and your substitute host for this week's podcast. And we're fortunate to be joined by Cuyahoga County Executive Chris Ronayne. Chris, thank you so much for coming today. I appreciate this.
Good to be with you, Dave.
I was talking to a mutual friend of ours today, John Story, and I was talking to him about you and I when we first met. And John, of course, remembers it in detail. He is the chief of staff for Lakewood Mayor Megan George now, and he says it was 10 years ago, and we were both at a then Indians game.
That's right.
And I said, absolutely, that's exactly right. So it's been 10 years of friendship, baseball friendship, politics friendship, so it really means a lot to have you here
it's
today.
It's great to be with you. And I would add to that list getting things done. It's good to be, getting things done with you. And to our mutual friend, John, I mean, it's great to see what they're doing in the city of Lakewood, too. You know, I represent 59 communities, and they're all in their own unique way different, but there's a lot of commonality. And some of the things I've been seeing lately in the city of Lakewood, like the walkability of the town, the connection to the waterfront, really the ideas about accentuating arts and culture, small business, a really open tent community, as I call it. There's a lot to like there. So shout out to Mayor George and to John and to our mutual friend. But shout out to you too. The party has been getting stuff done, and I'm really, as a member of your executive committee in the Cuyahoga County Democratic Party,
that's right.
Really, really impressed with just this past August turnout and the way you turned out the vote for this quote unquote special election. It was impressive feat, and I want to just thank all Cuyahoggans, especially our Democrats who got out and voted, because we turned out the vote thanks to the leadership of this party, you guys, our citizens, and I think we led all leaders in the state.
We did. We had the highest,
where we should be.
77%, the highest, and the highest no votes, highest sheer total votes. So, it was remarkable. And thank you for being a partner this whole time. You've never said no to anything. So,
well, and one last point on that. I think I told you it was nice to have some bragging rights up here in Cuyahoga County. I was happy to work with you that day on Election Day, right out of these offices at Democratic headquarters. Right. But I got a call offline from a friend of mine who's a county commissioner down in Franklin County, Commissioner John O'Grady, and he said, "Who's it going to be? You or us?" Yeah. And I bet us. County,
That's great.
Nothing on the wager line other than our pride. That's and we won it. And so thank you, Cuyahoga County Democrats.
Right on. So interesting to start there. So 2021, 2022, we saw a real shift in the political landscape in this. Some of the big institutional positions went to newcomers. Mayor Justin Bibb in 2021, then the county party last summer of 22, and then last November with your election. And people would bring that up to me a lot last year, and perhaps even to yourself. So I guess what does it mean to be a Democrat to you, or what is a Democrat? Why are you a Democrat?
Well, I would say, just reflecting back on the elections that you mentioned, some of the bigger ones. I mean, first of all, there were some open seats. It was nice to just be in a place where we had some seats open up. Obviously, the major city mayor's race in Cleveland was an open seat, as an example. But it was nice to see, new leadership just step up, and got to go. When you go, you go. And I consider myself one of those people. I've been around public service for a long time, but this is my first elected office hold. Now as county exec, and some would say, well, that's a quantum leap to go from nowhere to county exec. But I would also say, over the years, it's been partnering in the multi-sectors, to try to get stuff done. I was lucky to be Cleveland planning director under Mayor Jane Campbell. She gave me a shot. I was campaign manager, learned a little bit about politics as we did that. But we all sort of, stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. I'm lucky to have gotten the opportunity to serve our community, but I feel like I've been in service for a long time. But it's when you get back to like, what's the sea change, what's the shift, or why for me to be a Democrat? I mean, the answer to that last question is easy. It's the big tent, big heart of this party, which is becoming more the exclusive domain of the Democratic Party. Absolutely. We are a party that is just, that cares in terms of the empathy for people. We are one that understands the richness of our diversity. We are one who stand for one another when the chips are down or when we're celebrating the successes. But I learned a long time ago that this is a party of a big tent, that steps up for our brothers and sisters in the LGBTQ community, and we need to say, we are family, that steps up for workers, that steps up for all our communities, black, brown, white, yellow, everybody, we're all together, and I think that's what's exciting about this party is that this is America. That this is who we are. Cuyahoga County, I often say, is a microcosm of this country. And so that's why it's fun to be a Democrat. I always say I didn't have to be anybody I wasn't. I just had to be myself when I was running. I said that over and over again. It's good to be home in Cuyahoga County, being who you are, never selling out your soul to somebody else that you're not. Right. And I've seen too much of that on the other side of people that are selling their soul. And for us, we're just who we are.
That's right. Chris, I think a lot of people don't know this, that you've actually been involved in politics for much longer than, like I said, people realize. You were, in fact, Democratic ward leader at one point in your...
Well,
go ahead.
I was mentioning you stand on the shoulders of those came before you. And, I was living in Lakewood. I moved into Cleveland in my early 20s. Professor of mine, Norm Krumholtz, who's always my mentor in city planning, just an amazing guy, worked for Carl Stokes. He said... Chris, I got a guy that you need to meet. He wants some help on a campaign. And I show up at the guy's door in Tremont, and it's a guy named Bob Hudacek. Great candidate, by the way. Sorry about what happened, because his campaign manager was me. I thought I was a volunteer, and then he said, am I meeting my new campaign manager? So I got the bug. We had a blast. We worked, at the time it was... Ward 13, and this was pre-Kerry McCormick, pre-Joe Simperman, but it was a ward that spanned from North Broadway to the River's Edge, eastward to 72nd. So picked up Huff, St. Clair, Broadway, downtown, and a little part of Ohio City. It was just in Tremont. It was a great experience. But I learned about Cleveland walking, knocking on doors, and just having conversations on porches with people about issues that mattered. Really caught the bug. And, I kept going with city planning, and I always said that politics and planning, but frankly, politics and almost any job, they inextricably link and they weave. And it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. So I did a lot of my off time with other candidates, but one of the things you mentioned was being a ward leader. Then it was Ward 18. It was for Councilman Jay Westbrook. Before he had actually been council president, I became his ward leader after his council presidency. I learned a lot from Jay. Again, knocking on doors in our ward back then, 18. And, I always said to Jay, and I'll shout out to him today, the blocks you went further and deeper into places where there was more and more economic disparity were the places where they loved Jay Westbrook more. And so, his mantra about, well, it works for all of us, that was Jay. And I was lucky to be his ward leader. I then got a lucky break to be Jane Campbell's campaign manager. It was an audacious task, 77 square miles of the city. Who is this kid? At the time, we had 21 wards to cover, and I just loved it. And it was all about the field team. It was all about the people who cared, that made the rounds for Mayor Campbell. And we won. Behold, we won. And again, I stand on the shoulders of all those people I mentioned, because they all gave me a shot.
That's great. Yeah. And today, you and I are both Clevelanders. And what we see in Cleveland, which is true really nationally, is we see trends of urban areas, in particular big cities, where turnout is going down. And certainly for 20, 30 years, really, in Cleveland, that has been the case. And I know you're an incredibly thoughtful guy. So have you any insights into why or how to rectify?
I mean, all you can do is step up and do, right? You got to go do the work. And, again, compliments to the party here. I've been with you calling in on election day, trying to get voters, engaged into the polls. But I'll tell you, where I'm working personally these days is in high schools, trying to get young persons engaged in the voting process, which means getting registered, which means knowing that you can vote, when you're 18 on the issues. If you're 17 and you're heading toward your 18th birthday at the time of the election, you can vote, So I'm trying to get young people engaged, and I tell them a little bit about my story coming up from high school and things that I did, and you just get them engaged in why it matters. That idea that, we're not kidding. We've seen elections where one vote's made the difference, in local elections particularly. We've seen that 1% where it made the difference, and you can make the diff. And you can name so many elections, but I'll tell you a story I tell the high school students all the time. In my 59 communities I ran in, I had a couple say that we got out and voted right after dinner at 6:30 on election eve, and they said, we voted for you. It was two people. Well, that particular village, Oakwood Village here in Cuyahoga County, I won by one vote. So that couple going out to vote after dinner actually turned me, as a victory in that community. Yeah. So I get to the young kids and say, get out and vote, and your vote matters. And then try to consider, running. A lot of younger people are running, whether it's legislature or whether it's city council races. A couple of younger mayors now, and I think it's just exciting to see, that new enthusiasm in the next generation. It's what we're going to have to do to turn the tide toward better engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. But I guess how do you communicate to people for whom job insecurity or housing insecurity or food, all of these other issues that they're dealing with?
Yeah.
Any suggestions on how to? Yeah.
Again, the high school students that I've been with recently in Cleveland, in Warrensville, in Westlake, you name it, wherever you are, and Tri-C's been helpful in engaging some of our high school students on the small D civics of getting kids engaged. We talk about the issues that really matter. I mean, I say to young women, do you want me to stand between you and your doctor? Right. That's why this matters. I say to young kids, do you want to see more climate deniers?
Right.
No, that's why this matters. I think you got to meet them where they're at. And I think what I'm seeing in a younger generation is their rights, their human rights, their respect for the diversity of who we are as a people, and their respect for the climate. These are things that are hitting with people. And I think when you match issues that matter to the fact that the voting actually matters on these issues, you resonate.
Isn't it remarkable? I think we're both Gen Xers, and it is really remarkable. And I taught at a college for several years. It is remarkable to see young people's intolerance of intolerance.
Exactly. I was just going to finish that line. Exactly.
That's been something.
It's a beautiful thing, and I've got 15 and 13-year-old in my life and my kids, and it's a beautiful thing to see kids tell it like it is. Yeah. To stand up to somebody who's, whether we're Gen X and they're Gen Z, and look up to X and say, you're wrong. I mean, think this through differently. I love seeing kids boldly convey their point of view. I love that, and there'll be generations perhaps elder than us that'll look down and say, well, they ought to mind their own business or keep their mouth shut. No, talk, speak with us. I was in a school the other day that teacher was shushing everybody. I'm like, no, let the kids say it. Let them say it. We need them engaged. I mean, I hope an engagement right now. We are looking only up, especially in our cities. I mean, our center cities, and I hate the correlation of poverty, of educational attainment, and the lack of voter engagement, because what it's signaling is despair and hopelessness. Right. But really, when you look at the aggregate of our next gen, I think there's a whole lot of hope.
I think so. Yeah. And for those, we're going to shift here to the job of county executive. Yeah. But for those who don't know, August 8th was a really big day, and we were doing phone banking here in Cleveland at party headquarters, calling Cleveland voters, and our county executive was nice enough to come make some calls for about a half hour to an hour. This shows the commitment to the party, to the city, to everything. So I, again, want to thank you so much for doing that.
I want to thank our Democrats for getting me here. And you get here, you got to remember who got you here, and you got to make the calls. Leaders show up, and it's about the work.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So we appreciate that. Yeah. So it's been almost a year since you were elected county executive, which is, there's only one other job in this state that has more constituents, right? Yeah. And that's the governor. The governor of Ohio. So what have been some of the biggest surprises in terms of your expectations when you took over, for good or ill?
Well, first I want to thank the workers of Cuyahoga County. I mean, we just submitted our county budget today, and first thing I did was thank our workers. You got 7,000 employees that are working hard. Yeah. Many of them not paid enough, and we're working on the wage disparities. But there's people who are just doing great public service work at just the ground level every day, and I want to thank the workers for that. And I try to be there. I try to get out to our offices. I try to meet with our organized bargaining units and try to just get to know people and what's on their mind as workers go. But as far as surprises go, look, I mean, I have felt, as I said earlier, that this is a constituency of solution providers. I mean, if you go out and listen to people, our frontline nonprofit leaders and workers, our organizations that are doing the work with the public agencies, you listen to what people are doing and you find civic solutions, civic entrepreneurs. I love that, and I knew they were there. I learned about it more on the campaign. If you do real listening on your campaign, you can move faster when you get there in the administration. I will say, of the surprises, and this is a sad, point. I felt that, there was a narrative about our workers, frankly, and where we were receiving kids at government buildings that I wanted to know more about. First week on the job, on a Friday night, I got a call from a social worker and her manager who were working late at our Jane and Hunter building, right. And they said we got a kid who's in an ambulance, and the directive from the hospital provider was to drop the kid off. And we argued back to the hospital, can you keep a kid for the weekend? It was a young teenage female. And they didn't. And so we took the girl in. And what I learned there on my very first week, first Friday on the job, was that our team is going around the clock to help people in the most dire need. And the person who called and the manager, they got her food, they got her a room for the weekend, and that's what we're seeing. We've seen kids dropped off in a school bus on a Friday afternoon. In both cases, they were Fridays, and it breaks your heart, but it also is humbling that we've got some really purposeful work to do to give those who have the least some footing, a ground to stand on, just the basics and ultimately the dignity that they deserve in their lives. So I knew this was out here, but I saw it really up close and personal how much some of our residents need us, and that's where the work is, and it's a heavy lifting.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah. Do you ever? One of the things that I think that I've certainly encountered is there is a sense. We know Cleveland has problems, and not unlike other cities. Do you ever have trouble getting people to buy into sort of long-term thinking? Because a lot of what needs to be fixed isn't going to be done in a year.
Yeah, that's a great point, Dave. I think I'm a believer. I might quote an old boss, Jane Campbell. She said, you got to ride your bike while fixing it. And I think there's something to that, we have to show people, sort of week by week, month by month, progress. But we also have to remind people that some of these systems didn't take a day to get broken, and they're not going to take a day to get fixed. They're going to take more. I think as long as you're showing a trajectory of performance and good outcomes, people bear with you. I'll take our justice system as an example. I mean, we have to work way upstream to diminish the number of persons who are coming downstream into the jail system. Right. We have got just some really sad statistics, and we got to remember that these aren't statistics. Every statistic is a life. Yeah. It's a person. And so when you have a disproportionality of young kids in our juvenile detention system that are disproportionately of color, we've got a problem. We've got to figure out when 30% of our county is African American, but over 80%, probably far over 80% of our young persons in custody of the detention center are black citizens. Right. We've got to really work at this. So there's a lot of upstream work. But again, where's the incremental progress? And are we working with our institutions to create things like bail reform, to create, pre-sentencing services? Are we doing enough with diversion, both at youth and adult level? Those are the things that I'm passionate about. Yeah. I don't wake up every day wanting to build a jail. What I want to do is work on the upstream work to diminish the number of persons that are in our custody. Yeah,
exactly. And I think we're, the party's looking, one of the things we hear, if you think about 34 common pleas judges and only 4 aren't white, in a county that is 38 to 40% not white, that matters to voters and voters of color. So I think you're absolutely right. Again, you got to show the progress and then hope.
Yeah, and thank you for noticing that yourself as a chair in this party and Vice Chair Brown. I mean, you guys are you're cognizant of how our public service and our public servants need to be, a reflection of who we are. That's right. Especially on the bench.
Absolutely right. So we've got, when you were running, and you're still talking about the idea of health, was central to your entire campaign and really has been central to a lot of what you're trying to do. In what ways, women's health, of course, the Advisory Council, the Freshwater Institute, environmental health, right? So how are those things progressing? And
great. Thanks for asking and remembering that is our framework. There's a framework coming in, and I remember distinctly listening to somebody on the campaign early on who said, this framework of health is really important. And I always appreciate my friend Ruth who said that. I will say to you that we've tried in the administration to make health our organizing principle and our framework, and also just moving narratives from things like welfare to wellness, and trying to really focus on. We talk about child welfare. Let's talk about child wellness, holistic, wellness. So it's at a departmental level. It matters in Health and Human Services that we're doing this. What motivates you? Social determinants of health that are, I've been saying this since campaign days, but we've got communities that might be 20 minutes from one another, and they might be 20 years expected age, life expectancy. I know. 20-year variances from communities 20 minutes away. Right. actually, I've been using some of our near East City neighborhoods benchmarked against some of our further eastern suburbs and that variance. And again, I blame no one specifically in those communities, but I've also been reminded lately that you could have blocks of difference. From the Buckeye neighborhood to the Shaker community, you might have a similar variance.
Absolutely.
And again, I think everybody's for trying to get on page and do something about this. So health is actually an area of common ground, amongst all of us in the Democratic Party. But I hope it's a common ground area that we can catch even more folks into.
Yeah.
Water, fresh water is a common ground area that I think people. I literally wear it on my lapel here with the Great Lakes. But we ought to tell our story. I'm a person who believes in Carl Stokes. I mean, he gave me a shot when I was a student to meet with him, and I've always said this, when I sat down with the great Carl Stokes, I was nervous, and he gave me a coffee with Carl, and he said to me at the very end of our talk, he said, "Change comes in inches," and I remembered that, and it motivated me in public service. But I remembered that there was a man who stood up, when it mattered, and said, "No more. Our river's not going to burn again." And the surface of the river never did burn again, and was really at the beginning of the Clean Water Act. And so, why don't we celebrate that in a way that actually puts Cleveland on the map, puts Cuyahoga County on the map globally?
One of the last serious topic would be this notion of population decline. So we, having grown up here, we've seen, and I think that Cleveland's population peaked in the city's population peaked in the 50s, some closing in on 1 million. Today, the city is under 400,000. We've seen also the county population decline. I guess my questions are, and if you knew the answer easily, it would have already. But does that even matter? So the Richie Paparin argument that it doesn't, that it really doesn't. And can we reverse it? And if so, are there any silver bullets?
Yeah, I mean, I am very much an optimist in this category. Well, one, it matters in congressional representation. It matters in a lot of things, right? So make sure you do fill out that census. Make sure that you do, get out and vote, and just be counted, right? So it matters. The reason I'm an optimist is one, I think we are where it's at. To be a big city, an asset base, and a mid-sized city of big city assets, we can again be a bigger city and bigger county region. This city is, you're right, population-wise, down into the 300,000s mark relative to where it was at 914,000 in 1950. So we've lost nearly 2/3 of our population. But we have infrastructure to accommodate that same 2/3 back. Nobody revels in climate migration. Nobody revels in the climate change that may push people more toward us. But I would rather people come to a freshwater, sustainable place than we pipe that freshwater endlessly to places that aren't sustainable. So I think, one, we have an advantage in terms of a sustainable landscape that we're in. And two, I think if we play immigration correctly, we will see the international city pop. I mean, we are 120 different ethnicities. It's why I'm proposing an Office of Immigration and Refugee Services. It might be international service. We'll see how it plays out, because people come here because they need to be here. They need to be with family. And some of our, just use Ukraine as an example. We've brought in and welcomed thousands to our region. I will be opening with our county a welcoming center in the not too distant future, because somewhere back when we all came from immigrants, right? And I think it's something that we need to celebrate about our community, that we've got the base to build a city. And you look up north, looking at these Great Lakes, the city of Toronto, across the pond. I mean, they've grown in immigrants, immeasurably. So I think those two things we stand to have a great advantage in.
So lastly, Chris, for those who don't know, is a super fan of Cleveland history. And if you don't follow him on what's X now, you should, because he's got constant. So I've been following you for years, and there's almost daily updates on some facet, known or unknown, about Cleveland history. Who is the greatest Clevelander of all time in your?
Oh, well, I thought you were going to stay on that Twitter X chain, because you would have liked yesterday. Yesterday was the was the anniversary of the largest ball game ever played. It was the amateur game. White Motors played at Omaha at Old Brooklyn near the zoo, and 115,000 people. So I still think that was one of the great achievements in our town. But let me answer your question about heroes. I mean, it is hard to answer that question. I mentioned, I'm a student of mayors. I'm a student of electeds. I think there's been some incredible people. You go back, look, Stephanie Tubbs Jones, when she was a young judge, was a high school student, and she invited me into her courtroom to learn more about a case because we were there for school. I mean, what a trailblazer, right? Ohio's first African-American congresswoman, an incredible leader. I'm sorry, I'm not answering a question with one person, but I gave a key to the county to Robert Madison recently, a man that's now 100 years old, but broke through, was denied entrance here locally to architecture school while he'd studied with the greatest, Walter Gropius, people that had been world-renowned, but just simply because of his race. But his own classmates, on his own, he got in, he said to them, I was a Purple Heart decorated veteran of war. Is any of this good enough? And he finally found an ear that let him in, and he, on his merits, succeeded. As I said on the day we gave that key to the county, Robert Madison started a business because of a blind architecture competition, meaning that they all submitted without knowing who they were, and he won on the merits of his work. Right. And he started one of the first African-American owned firms in this country, architecture firms, and in Ohio. I mean, he's a hero to mine. So I mentioned too, Stephanie and Robert. We could talk about Garrett Morgan, and we're coming up on the 100th anniversary of the invention of the traffic signal that continues to save lives. The waterworks, and where he did the work with the safety mask and the safety hood, and he and his brother literally pulled tunnel workers out. I'm going on and on, but I got to come back to Carl Stokes, because in contemporary life, I had the honor to meet him at the end of his life. He was on his way to become the ambassador to Seychelles and was appointed by Clinton administration, but we were able to catch him for a cup of coffee because I stood up in class and said, would you go with me to coffee? And he said, I'll be at Shaker Square Beacon on Saturday. Come with me. And I did, and I got a half hour with Carl, but it changed my life. And what he said, and I mentioned it before, the commentary, he said, the change comes in inches. It motivated me to get into public service. But I as a public official now in this town, we stand on his shoulders. Guy that had the guts to stand up for what was right in this town. And we talked earlier about clean water, and we owe a lot to Carl and Lou Stokes and all the aforementioned others. I mean, they're my heroes. You can go back and back. So student of mayors, I always appreciate the shot I got from Jane Campbell. I appreciate my graduate professor, Norm Krumholtz, who was a planning director who started the conversation on equity. I appreciated Carl Stokes, who was in his class, and I wouldn't have met him had he not been for Norm. And I appreciate all the way back to Tom Johnson and the 3-cent fare, somebody that was in equity and a real progressive, So, I mean, we've had a lot of great leaders. Now we got to add this up to what's next for all of us, and it's leveraging what we've got in this town for a greater future.
Carl Stokes, by the way, the night Martin Luther King Jr. was shot and killed, there were only 2 northern cities that did not riot. One of them was Indianapolis, because Bobby Kennedy was there that night giving that speech. The other one was Cleveland and Carl Stokes, because he was literally walking the streets, keeping people calm. No, this has been great. I thank you so much, County Executive Ronayne.
Yeah, David, thank you for all you're doing, and to everybody that works every day for democracy.
That's right. Thank you, and thanks everybody.